So, hi, I am Ashley Leckwold. I am a writer slash podcaster, specifically with the podcast Rangersplain, where I talk Power Rangers with Jay Smith, who is watching the chat right now. Wave if you hear that, Jay.
Called the fuck out.
They got here before you did, so.
You know what? It takes time to be this much of a train wreck, but continue.
I mean, fair. So writer, podcaster, number jockey at my regular job. So general pop culture enthusiast, extremely gay, the basics.
Love that for you.
Thanks.
And of course, Ashley is also sometimes my producer for one of the many projects and side projects that I do. And if you get my Patreon up from $110 to $300, I can actually hire her to be a producer again. So right now I'm just kind of living off of the free labor that she's agreed to donate to do this today, because it's going to go on Read from the Rafters with Judas Slays. So I don't know, look at our YouTube link. There will be a link to tip her as always. So do that so that I can sleep at night, right?
Yeah.
Because, yeah. But yeah, I'm a lot of different people. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out who I should be today. But I guess because this is going to go up on Read from the Rafters, my drag name is Judas Slays. And I have a Patreon called Read from the Rafters with Judas Slays, which is largely YouTube-based stuff. The big project for it is a trans studies project. But that takes a long time to figure out. So we're just supplementing it with various things. But basically, I'm a cartoonist. I'm an OnlyFans cosplay girl under my actual name, Veronique Emma Houbois. So if you don't hear a Scottish accent, then it's not actually Judas Slays. And you'll probably notice I'm wearing a little bit less makeup than I would. If we were going to do something like this, you've got to get a bit of a warm-up before you just kind of leap right into it.
Right.
But we've got a little bit of a Glaswegian ASMR for 2 seconds. But, yeah, we're giving it a shot. That's me. Links will be provided wherever when we upload this. But yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so yeah, about this time last week, do you want me to call you Emma or Judith for the video?
Oh, it's just Emma, honey.
Okay. Okay.
Like I said, if you don't hear the accent.
All right, that's fair enough. So yeah, about this time last week, Emma had asked me if I was interested in doing a Instagram live video like this that we're doing right now, specifically about Howard Ashman, who was a lyricist, composer. Well, he's more of a lyricist, but songwriter, screenwriter, stage director for 3 Disney projects, so Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and a little bit of Aladdin before he passed away. And then he also wrote and directed Little Shop of Horrors, which is a horror musical comedy based on Roger Corman horror comedy from 1960, sometime in the 1960s. I will look up the exact date later. I want to say 64. Which was allegedly one of the cheapest films ever made. And then, so Ashman was of particular interest just due to the fact that he was a very high-profile case of someone who passed away from AIDS in the late 80s, early 90s, specifically 1991. And he was actually the first person to win an Oscar that had passed away from AIDS. And he had actually passed away about the year before he won an posthumous Oscar for, I believe, Be Our Guest.
Yeah, and the actual, the specific reason I asked you if you wanted to do this was kind of the weird timing of I can't remember why you had talked about this at at the exact moment, because you had already watched the Disney Plus thing a while ago. But like my phone keeps trying to go to sleep, and it's like, fuck you. And my lighting is awful. This is just a fucking nightmare. But
I just gotta roll with it.
I guess this is so fucking embarrassing. Like, yeah, hi, there's my beard. Anyway, yeah. So the whole reason I asked, because there was a particular tweet that you had made talking about the fact that Howard Ashman had. I mean, this was not the first time you had said this, but you had kind of talked a little bit about how he had hid his, his sickness, his HIV status from Disney, right?
Yes.
And I think the particular point in that tweet had to do with like healthcare.
Yeah.
Right? Is that you get kicked off, you lose that, you get kicked off healthcare. And you tweeted that either right before or right after Chadwick Boseman died.
It was right after, yeah.
Right after. So I guess maybe that was front of mind when you said that.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure, because you just tweeted it as its own thing, which I think was the smart thing to do, which was definitely the sensitive thing to do. But I made that connection immediately. And so I thought kind of like a big thing to talk about, and it's weird, like I don't want to create false equivalencies around this, right? But it's like, especially when you look at like media narratives, right? Not if you look at who was Chadwick Boseman and why did he do what he did versus who was Howard Ashman, why did he do what he did? Because of course Boseman was much more in the public eye. He was a public figure. Right. Whereas Ashman really kind of wasn't, because of the roles that he had took him behind the scenes, behind the camera. But it was just so fascinating because there was so much of a conversation, right, about the fact that the Chadwick Boseman had hid this. And one of the things was like the people discussing the physical changes that he went through.
Right.
As he struggled with this, and had made public appearances and kind of been mocked for how he looked tired, how he looked kind of, fed up, or like I guess skinnier. These aren't things that I really remember, but I'm like, I will take on faith, because these are great media people pointing this stuff out. And so parts of that, especially like the way that his appearance in public were critiqued, and the way that it was just kind of like, you kind of get those flashbacks to that era, but it's kind of like there were all these weird and like bad hero narratives coming out of like the whole thing with Chadwick Boseman. Like, isn't he, look at how great he was for dealing with this and all of that. And it just really kind of, I saw like at least one person who was kind of like, it's entirely possible that this was like a source of joy for him, and not something that he, do you know what I mean? Because it was just like, it was this very like Protestant work ethic,
right? Yeah,
kind of thing happening,
right?
And so it was so bonkers, but the whole thing in terms of, like doing that role, especially meeting those kids and these kinds of things, could have definitely been a source of joy for him. Whereas, like, when we look at just kind of the ways that the typical media would talk about Howard Ashman as kind of like this like, I don't know, gothic, pitiable figure, the way that AIDS has like those kinds of responses have typically engendered, it's kind of wild. There's these two different kinds of narrative that sweep out of like illness and trying to cope with illness within the Disney machine.
Right.
So it's these weird parallels, and it's the one thing it made me think of, really, and this is probably not surprising if you know me at all, was Susan Sontag.
Right.
Right, I can make anything about Susan Sontag, trust me. Right? Shout out to Sarah Sentry if you ever watch this. But like the whole thing is like, she of course eventually died of cancer. Right. And there are these extremely controversial photos that her partner Annie Leibovitz took close to her death, or I think maybe even immediately after her death, that they're rough because it was bad. But that was her second or third kind of like quote unquote bout with cancer in terms of remission and coming back. But the first time that Sontag got cancer, I thought I actually had a copy of this essay, but I don't.
Okay.
So I'm just going to have to give you the rough bits. But she wrote an essay called "On Cancer," and it's actually it's one of her most famous ones, up there with Notes on Camp, which is the one you'd hope you'd be talking about with Howard Ashman, right? But it's not.
Yeah.
But this was also like pre-HIV, right?
Right.
So cancer was kind of that big cultural specter, illness-wise, that really just had no other corollary at the time. And she kind of, wrote about the stigmas and the ways that people were seen when they were known to have cancer, and how attitudes towards you shifted, so much.
Right.
And so she became this big cultural figure for kind of like changing the way that cancer was viewed. And she certainly didn't, engender any of those hero storylines that have changed over the decades and that were applied to Chadwick Boseman. But it's interesting to think about just sort of what a recent cultural shift, even the accommodation of those kinds of narratives, has become, right? And it's kind of ironic, because of course Sontag was, she never identified or really admitted that she experienced same-gender attraction really in her lifetime, but she was with Annie Leibovitz for literal decades and had dated other women. And so she really altered the way that we talked about illness in the public sphere, I want to say maybe a decade before AIDS. I think it was in the 1970s that she wrote that, and I'm pretty sure it was pre-AIDS. Because, of course, once the AIDS crisis hit, Susan Sontag's On Cancer, I don't know how influential it ever was because of the ambivalent and kind of distanced way that Sontag treated, her own, I don't know that I want to say queerness, but you know what I mean, right? Her own attractions, I guess, and the way that, in the ambivalent ways that she treated it in her work. I don't know how readily anybody embraced On Cancer to talk about the AIDS crisis. But there are certainly there's a weird liminal space between the two,
right?
That Sontag's work came to inhabit, and so I kind of see that bridge there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like you mentioned the hero narrative, because that never really, because I watched I watched two particular documentaries about kind of Disney around that time and Ashman, one being Waking Sleeping Beauty, and the other being Howard, which is the documentary that recently came out. There's not really a hero narrative there per se, and like kind of that gothic tragedy, but I think also playing from people who knew him personally is that he was very angry about the fact that he was dying, which reasonable. But yeah, it's like
and this was 1991, right?
Yeah, he was
that he died.
Yeah, he died in 91. I think he was first diagnosed in 86, around the time that the Little Shop of Horrors movie was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so basically he had it entirely working through Little Mermaid. They actually brought the production of Beauty and the Beast to him in upstate New York.
Yeah, because it was released in 1992.
Yeah. Wait, no, I believe that one was late 91 or 90. They were like right back. That and Aladdin were like right back.
Actually, it's the 1992 Oscars. Sorry, it won an Oscar in 1992,
Oscars.
So it was released in 1991.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about the 1992 Oscars in a minute.
Yeah,
we will.
Yeah. So yeah, because there's never really that hero narrative, and especially like he not just being a gay man from New York, but like he kind of had a deep connection with it to begin with because his partner before Bill Watch, Stuart White, passed away from AIDS very early on during the AIDS crisis, like even before they had a specific name for it.
Well, apparently, was it? No, I got that wrong. Never mind.
Yeah.
I was just about to incorrectly say what doctor named it, but...
Yeah, I know there was a specific name for AIDS before they called it like HIV and AIDS. that specifically was like gay something something. I don't remember off the top of my head. I was actually very surprised by the fact that when the documentary does begin talking about AIDS, that they do specifically use a I forget which news program it was, but they use a news program from like I want to say 84 or so. And basically mentioning the fact that like it is an epidemic that barely anyone is talking about because mostly it's been affecting gay men, and they actually interviewed Larry Kramer in it. So it was like
wow.
young Larry Kramer, full beard. Not that one was what I
Speaking
think.
of angry.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
Yeah,
like people who the media
yeah,
you know delegitimized by referring to them as angry.
yeah, exactly. In that one, it's like they don't use any of the angry Larry Kramer in any of it. Like that's the only bit of the documentary where you see Kramer as sort of an explanation as we're going to establish the kind of atmosphere that was happening around it when he lost his first partner, Stuart White. I think there was another friend of his named, I think, David Evans. But specifically, he even wrote a song about all of the losses that were occurring around that time called Sheridan Square, which Alan Menken does occasionally perform. The song was never formally released until like years and years later, long after his death. I think it was on a CD called Howard Sings Ashman, which was just full of demos and stuff. But like Menken does, Alan Menken, who was his songwriting partner for basically Little Shop of Horrors, his God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater musical, and not Smile, but Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin.
There you go. You've got your IMDb page ready.
Yes. God, what was that? But basically, yeah, just sort of, the early effect of it before he was even diagnosed. I had a whole thought line there, and my brain is shorting out, so I'll pick it back up in a second. It actually was really interesting in the documentary. They talk about the day he was diagnosed with HIV. He was having to he was in the middle of kind of this promotional thing for Little Shop of Horrors. And first of all, he didn't want to get an HIV test directly because he said, if it goes on my record, I'll probably lose my health insurance. So, yay, capitalism.
Yay, tying healthcare to employment.
Yes, that too.
Right. And I do just want to make that slightly pedantic point because of just kind of where we are politically at this particular moment.
Right.
I mean, capitalism at the root. Yes. But like in terms of like places that we might be able to push the needle over the next decade, depending on who wins the next presidential election, it's just fun to get some of those talking points that I hear on my podcast all the time in there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we alluded to, like where this whole thing started, right? Like with why I even asked you to do this. What was the fact that you had tweeted him talking about the prospect of losing his health care was a big part of why he hid that illness from Disney, right?
Yeah, part of it was the healthcare, because like they kind of circumvented doing the HIV test directly with doing its cell count, and since it came back so low, they were basically able to determine, yes, you are HIV positive. But another reason he didn't want to disclose to Disney, he didn't disclose to anybody in Disney until after Little Mermaid won awards and they were moving on to Beauty and the Beast, was that he was afraid of kind of the moral backlash, I guess you would call it, of just because, he's working on these, ostensibly children's films. And he's like a big part of it. He's not just coming in, composing the songs, and then getting out. Like, he's actively involved in the production process. They talk about that a lot when, Little Mermaid, was that he has kind of, when he came on board, he was very influential in terms of kind of redirecting the project in terms of, like, well, what if we made Sebastian Jamaican? What if, like, here's some songs that, could work for the musical, and, he very clearly had in mind that they would go into the musical, and then, specifically with Rob Minkoff talking about doing all these, like, concept designs for Ursula, where she was described as a Joan Collins type in the script. So they were designing all these skinny, like, sea witches with the high cheekbones, and then he just randomly drawn one that was more like divine.
So kind of like Yzma, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah,
Emperor's New
yeah.
Groove, that's kind of the image that I'm picturing there.
Yeah, so they show some of, like, I want to say it was Howard. Yeah. So the director who did Sleeping Beauty also did Howard. I don't know if I already mentioned that. Don Hahn. Yes. So they show all of these, like, preliminary, like, designs of Ursula, and that she looks like Yzma, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said that Rob Minkoff said that he did one specifically inspired by Divine. And when Howard came in and was looking over the designs, he said he zeroed in on that one specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's hilarious in the documentary. They specifically use a clip from Female Trouble, and not Hairspray. Female Trouble.
I have the Criterion copy of that, and it's still in the plastic.
Oh my god!
I paid $50 for it, and I've never fucking watched it. I fucking love that for me so much. Gotta, you gotta support the tiny little bits of queer cinema that the Criterion Collection allows.
Right? Ugh. But anyway, yeah. So it was like, why specifically that one? And then he kind of clicks in. It's like, oh yeah, he was a gay Jewish man from Baltimore.
Okay, so wait. Wait. Was it Howard or Rob who's from Baltimore?
Howard is. Howard was from Baltimore. So he grew up, I forget how exactly.
But it was Rob that drew it.
Yeah, Rob Minkoff drew the design, and Howard was the one who basically said that's what we're going with.
Do we know much about Rob?
I did not really get a chance to kind of look up more about him before we got into this.
Mm-hmm.
I basically, when I was going back and rewatching Howard, it was mostly to get down the names,
so
that
fully.
way I wasn't just cursing like.
No, this is just random curiosity, because I didn't realize it wasn't him who actually started that thing.
Yeah, I would say he kind of gave, like, the final approval for what we saw, in concept stages to what we saw in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked about a little bit about, there's this interview clip where him and Alan Menken talk about how his demo of him singing Poor Unfortunate Souls. But yeah, I don't know that much about Rob Minkoff. I think he's just sort of one of those, one of the many Disney animators that get focused on but never really get, like, a huge, let me see here. He's got his own Wikipedia page. He ended up being the director for Lion King.
Oh, party.
Yeah. Also Jewish. Grew up in California. Went to Cal Arts.
So would you say that he, like, draws in the Cal Art style?
Oh, bitch.
No, it's actually pronounced Butch.
Yes, of course.
It was him that said that, right?
Oh gosh.
It was. Isn't that the guy's name? The guy who did, like, I don't know, like, Clone High and all that shit?
I know the person who popularized Cal Art style as a derogatory was John K from
Chris Cafalusi, the sex offender. Oh my god, that's even better. I love that.
Oh,
it's an even worse person. Sorry, I didn't realize it was Chris Cafalusi. I thought it was the, like, Total Drama Island, Clone High, whatever dude who is also, like, I mean, he, like, as far as I know, there's no allegedly to put in front of. So we'll sprinkle those for Chris Cafalusi, because I don't think that's ever been proved in court,
Yeah.
Allegedly, I'll just go into Premiere and just fucking, put the Jesus and Miro sprinkles on it. Yes. But, okay, so it was Chris Cafalusi who came up with the whole Cal Art style thing. That's so funny.
Yeah, and, like, because he was mad about, like, Brad Bird on fucking The Iron Giant, of all things.
He was a guy with like weird axes to grind. So okay, so Rob went to Cal Arts.
Yeah. I says here, like, I can't seem to find anything else on his Wikipedia
Mm-hmm.
page about why specifically he decided he was randomly going to do an Ursula design out of all of these
Mm-hmm.
that looked like Joan Collins to make one look like Divine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a story I want to know. But it's not covered in Waking Sleeping Beauty. It's not covered in Howard.
Right.
Just more of like Howard saw that design. He was like, yes.
So we understand why Howard would go for it, right? Because
Yes.
but you know, a fun little diversion to take it on is just kind of like the ways in which we never really more broadly like recognize the cultural influence of like queerness coming out of like Baltimore specifically.
Right.
And like, yes, John Waters is the nucleus of all of that, right?
Right.
Because you do need some deranged cis gay man
Right.
to teach you about any city. It just needs to happen. Because it's, oh my God, if you ever read his book, Role Models, and it's just like a collection of like problematic faves because he does talk extensively about one of the members of the Manson family, and that's a very like tangled thing, right?
Right.
Because once you understand just how like malnourished and tortured these women were, it's kind of like, yeah, how do we discuss agency in terms of like this stuff, right? We always talk about like Patty Hearst, right? Because
Right.
Patty Hearst was this like perfect victim who like was brainwashed into joining her captors. So you get like the Stockholm syndrome and stuff, which
Right.
I think is like not actually real. I can't remember, but I think it's been like thoroughly debunked or something, and that it
Yep.
was just like a really successfully argued thing in court.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not sure either way. But it's like you talk about this kind of thing with Patty Hearst, but you can't talk about it with the Manson family and particularly the female members, because I don't remember that much about Tex in particular. But right, but what you learn in this book is just how bizarre of a place like Baltimore was
Right.
when like Waters was growing up, even before he hooked up with Divine, and they were like doing all of this stuff that just like had such a key influence on like everybody from like Johnny Knoxville to like obviously people at Disney that they could find all of this stuff, right?
Right.
Because like Hairspray, I mean the ways that Hairspray talks about race, you know, like in 2020 you could find better, right? But it was like as a city, right, and as a culture of how you deal with that in Maryland, and right, like why was Baltimore such a key place to do a story like Hairspray in, right? And you know, you even look at like the history of like LBGT representation in television, and you go to The Wire, and you go to Michael K. Williams playing Omar in The Wire. And like I love making this fucking joke. And it's not like exactly a joke, but it kind of is, where it's like David Simon's Baltimore, John Waters is Baltimore, and there's a Venn diagram, and the exact center point is Omar Little, right? Because like you could see like Michael K. Williams as that character in like a fucking John Waters movie.
Right.
Like it's not difficult to picture it, right? And like Waters, like in his more like queer stuff, in terms of, you know, like and more like transgressive stuff as opposed to like Hairspray or like the Johnny Depp one, Crybaby.
Right.
You know, like it's still very like white Baltimore, and like white queer Baltimore. So Omar is not exactly like representative of like a part of Baltimore queer life that like. And I mean, Kima's also like, she's a lesbian too, but I mean, like Omar is such a magical realist character.
Right.
He is like the second most, or not the second most, but one of two extremely larger than life characters in that show, and the other one is like a Nation of Islam hitman, who is just like Brother Muzan just does not exist. Like that's just not real, you know, because they needed to give themselves something, otherwise the show would be just too much. But like Omar is based on a real guy who really did shit like that, like who really was, you know, like sticking up drug dealers and shit, and he was gay as well, and that's why, you know, I think they were maybe initially going to do him as straight, and then when like Michael K. Williams found out that the basis for the character was somebody gay, he was like, yeah, no, we're going to do this. I can't remember exactly how it played out, but please listen to Way Down in the Hole, the Ringer podcast, going through every episode of The Wire, because it's incredible. But it's just, it kind of goes to the point that, like, there is more to gay American culture than, like, Los Angeles and New York. And, like, even, but, like, is Los Angeles actually represented in, like, gay American culture? Like, actual, like, do you know what I mean? Because, like, if you watch, like, if, in terms of, like, actually watching something, like, you know, like, tons of shit gets produced in Los Angeles, but, like, is LA itself actually, like, that represented in, like, the long history of gay media? Because, like, Angels of America is in New York, honey.
Right.
Philadelphia is in Philadelphia, honey.
Right.
That's a joke. But, you know, it even does skew so much more, like, Rent, honey, is in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find these examples, but it's like, it is so, even just so narrowly focused on New York.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the tri-state area, right? With Philadelphia. That, you know, even Los Angeles does kind of get choked out. I'm like, what's actually gay that's, like, in Los Angeles? And I'm just, like, fucking blanking. I could point out tons of stuff that gets made there. You know, and it's like, who's won Drag Race? New York, New York, New York, New York, New York, Atlanta. You know, hi, Pilot. Right, but you know, but, like, the queer South, is just also so diverse in what it is and what it's brought to the culture, because you cannot conflate what Baltimore has brought with, like, John Waters and whatnot. You cannot conflate that with, like, you know, Georgia, maybe not necessarily Atlanta in specific, but, like, you know, that fucking Kevin Spacey, John Cusack movie, you know, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Oh, yeah.
Clint Eastwood fucking nailing it with trans representation better than your liberal faves, motherfuckers.
I still don't even know how, but
the first time I ever saw a trans woman in a movie, and she was fucking playing herself, and it was fucking Clint Eastwood. But the whole thing, like, it's actually very obvious with Clint Eastwood. It's just that he, like, really gives a shit about, like, realism in that sense. It's like, if he's going to cast someone, he's going to cast someone from that community, and it's not like a liberal agenda. It's not a political progressivism thing. It's just his attachment to a particular kind of realism. I think to a certain extent, maybe, like, casting Indigenous actors was a bit more serious for him, because he did have some understanding of how, like, fucked up John Ford was. And I think he's talked about that. But, like, you know, Gran Torino, they went out and found, you know, Hmong actors, and, like, just took people, like, that house party was just a house party. They're like, hey, show up, run a, you know, have a house party, we'll pay for it, and we're going to shoot some actors in it, right?
All right.
So, but, like, the queer South, and, like, New Orleans, I mean, I can't super point to any one particular thing other than, like, the times that Ryan Murphy has shot things there. But, like, it particularly has its own, well, sorry, God, what is his name? Hot Potato Style. Motherfucker, I can picture him. I always fuck up his name, always, every single time.
Big Frida?
No. But I mean, Big Freedia is she's Bounce, and she's, like, a huge voice of Louisiana and the Louisiana queer scene.
Yeah.
No, he had, like, I mean, you might compare it to, like, Dennis Rodman, like, he always had, like, the short neon hair. He was a little bit before Big Frida, and he died a few years ago.
Oh, God.
It's fucking killing me, because I listen to him all the goddamn time. He has, like, 3 songs on Spotify, and they're all produced by Diplo, because that's who went out there and found him. But anyway, you know, this is the beginning of, you know, this is the end of your career, the beginning of mine, bitch.
Right.
Right. But it's, you know, there's just, you know, and I know this wasn't queer, but the South's got something. So, like, when was that Outkast?
Yeah, it was Outkast.
Who was it that said that? It was Outkast.
That's Source Awards or something like that.
The Source Awards, yeah. And that was, like, really in the middle of the, like, Suge Knight, fucking, what do we even call him? I guess he was Puff Daddy at the time.
Yeah, I believe, yeah. So it was, like, in the middle of the East Coast, West.
He would have been Puffy.
Yeah, Puffy.
Yeah, at the time. And they were just like, hi, we're out here. Scarface is in Texas. Like, shit's happening. Dungeon family, bitch. But like that's why like that's like one big part of like why we just really have to change the conversation about like how we talk about queer subtext in like fucking Disney movies. Yes, Nikki DeB. Thank you so fucking much, Alexander. Yes. Yes. It's Nikki DeB. Thank you so much. Um, but like how we reframe the way that we talk about queer subtext in Disney movies, because like we know this now. Like we didn't know this shit for years. And like The Little Mermaid is like so infuriating because like when you were growing up, like please tell me what the urban legends and the things the kids said about The Little Mermaid were. Please tell me, because I know you heard the same shit I did.
The one I heard the most was the fact that it was the priest at the end of the movie when they're having the wedding on the boat. Like the urban legend was that he had a boner at one point. And then there was a whole, I think this was an actual controversy about something on the VHS cover looking like a dick.
The spires.
Yeah.
On the like castle or whatever you call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the big one I knew. I totally forgot the priest, so I'm super glad that I just asked you to say that instead of trying to remember myself. Because as soon as you started, I was like, oh, fuck. Yeah. Right. And there was, like, they also said shit about, like, Aladdin and The Lion King. And there's, like, the Lion King one where it was just, like, the special effects people that were just, like, goofing around, and then it became this whole deal.
Yeah,
but, like, it just gets so annoying because, like, out of all the things that we could have talked about, I mean, the culture just was not there, obviously. Right. But, like, all of the things that could have been talked about in terms of, like, stuff that The Little Mermaid did, that's where we went with it. And, like, the thing that drives me nuts is all of the, like, Ursula stuff. And, like, tender queers. It's complicated. I know. I get it. You're young. I was stuck with one of you in a women's studies class, and it was atrocious. Because, like, I have actually got into, like, a verbal argument during a presentation about Ursula and all of this, because it just drives me nuts. Because there's this whole, like... Because this is the problem with being, like, a college undergrad when you're, like, 35 fucking years old, honey. Like... A lot of times you just know to be like they're 19, they're 20, but it's like I'm at a 2-year college that like I've never been the oldest person in my classes. There's always someone's like grandma in there that like legit gets free tuition, so it's whatever.
Right.
But like I'm just like they need to work shit out. Like I really don't need to jump in. It's like those tweets that you see, you're like I could QT this, but it's just like you don't need to. You can just scroll on. But this is one that just drove me bonkers because like you know how they used to call like Gen X the generation that was raised by TV, right? This is the fucking generation raised by like Anita Sarkeesian YouTube video. And it's just like, so they love the word trope, and I'm just like, please delete the word trope from your vocabulary. So they'll watch these YouTube videos, and then they start talking about like queer coding, and it's like, honey, no, because when they talk about stuff like that, it's like that this is how queerness is like villainized or marginalized and all of this kind of stuff. And that was kind of like the whole thing with like Ursula. I didn't really know, like I knew that Howard Ashman was gay and then he worked on the songs in like 2017 or like 18, I think was when this happened. Right. But like I didn't fully know this. I didn't fully know the story that you just told me. Right. So it's like fine, you do the interpretations that you can based on what you have. But I knew that there was at least some actual gay involvement in that movie.
Oh yeah.
And it was just kind of like, oh yeah, like Ursula is based on this like drag queen and she's the villain, and that this is queer coding, and I just Michelle massaging the living fuck out of it without realizing what I'm doing. But I was just like, no, right? Because it's like Divine Millhouse himself, was this transgressive figure, and it's just kind of like. Yeah, like Ursula is the villain of the story, but there's so much more to this than that, right? And it's like you don't necessarily know where this is coming from. Like the interpretation that they were kind of like offering to the class was like, here's like straight people showing you gayness, and it's like, I guess you don't know what Rob's orientation was.
Well, so I don't know about Rob's orientation.
Right.
Like, Ashman was such sort of a central figure when it came on board from like John Clements and what's the name of the other? Because they worked on like so many different things and attempted like so eventually they could do their Treasure Planet.
Oh my God, that's a long con. Jesus
Yeah, it
Christ.
was. Oh yeah. There's like a Lindsay Ellis video or from like based on like a Disney War or something like that,
Yeah.
where basically it was Ron Clements and John Musker. That was it. So they brought Ashman on board after, because the part about it they never talk about is that I didn't find this out until I watched, I think it was Dream Sounds on YouTube, where they brought Ashman initially on board to write a song for Oliver and Company. Specifically kind of was like, okay, let's, because he wanted to be like break it more of a musical because he thought that like that was going to be like the best avenue to create musicals, and so far animated musicals are like kind of the best avenue for making movie musicals in the United States. Otherwise you get Cats. But yeah, and so he kind of was specifically like, we need to have like a song, an I Want song where Ariel sings about what she wants, and specifically based it like, you know, with reference Brigadoon, and there was another musical in there that I forget. So that kind of popularized that use of the I Want song at Disney. And like, you know, you have, you know, with songs like When Will My Life Begin from Tangled.
Was there magic water in that song in Little Mermaid?
I don't remember. I just recently rewatched this, and like, I don't think the water itself was the one doing anything.
No, but does she look into water in that song?
Not that I recall.
Fuck.
Because yeah, he basically
Ralph breaks the internet, but anyway, continue.
Yeah, they have him like talking about like, you know, they usually sit on a, like, it's the heroine, like third song in, sits on a stump, or in the case of Audrey from Little Shop of Horrors, she sits on a trash can and sings an entire song about what she wants out of life, and you're supposed to fall in love with her like when she tells you what she's wanting out of life. Which the Little Shop of Horrors example is really funny and also kind of sad in a way, because what Audrey wants out of life in Little Shop of Horrors,
she's underwater.
Yeah, she can't really look into the water. Yeah. But anyway, so the funny thing about Audrey in Little Shop of Horrors is that hers is kind of funny and sad, because what she wants out of life is like kind of the stereotypical 50s American dream. She wants a track house with like a lawn and plastic on the furniture.
Burbank.
Yeah, and it's like
all that started in Burbank.
It's funny, like, because it's like all in the context of like you want something that's desperately capitalist, but when you also take in the fact that like Audrey is a character who's grown up poor, she dates around these guys that just beat the shit out of her. It's like, oh, that's like, and it does kind of bring on that queer context of like, oh, you want something that
assimilation.
That it feels out of reach from that. And
although I do kind of wonder, as you're talking about her singing this song, that was definitely like tied to like Ashman's Disney dialectic. That really makes me wonder if Vanellope's song in Ralph Breaks the Internet is actually in some ways informed by that, because it does the same thing, because it is Vanellope's song about like what she wants in life, and it's that she wants to live in the Grand Theft Auto game with Gal Gadot, and you go through all of this thing, so it is kind of like an opposite of an assimilation thing. But like, it all starts with her staring into the soda, right? She gets her big reflection song, which is like that joke that they make in the princess sequence. So I kind of wondered, because obviously they were deep in all of that shit when they were writing Ralph Breaks the Internet, that like they would know Ashman, right?
Of course.
So I kind of wonder if it was intentional that Audrey's song. I mean, I've never really dug deep to see if anybody's ever like tried to do these analyses of Ralph Breaks the Internet. I kind of doubt it because it just wasn't seen as that kind of movie, even though it really fucking is that kind of movie, and it's actually incredibly important to the evolution of Disney movies.
But yeah, I specifically because that was like the thing that he had worked on sort of most recently-ish before he came on to Disney. Like there was a time where he did a musical with Martin Hamlish called Smile, that's where he works with Jodie Benson. So that's how she got brought on board for Little Mermaid. I think it was particularly interesting, kind of like after I watched Little Shop of Horrors movie, I went and found a bootleg of the Pasadena Playhouse production of the Little Shop of Horrors stage show where MJ Rodriguez played Audrey.
Oh wow! Okay, okay. So what you were saying about Audrey and her history with man and wanting the safety and the stability of the suburban life, you know, and that already having some kind of a queer context just becomes a glowing neon fucking light. So although the slight irony of that, of her being the cast member of Pose that did Audrey, is that that's India Moore's character's arc in season one, right? With like the Evan Peters character who works for Trump.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And like, because I don't think they were specifically playing her as trans. Like they don't specifically say Audrey is trans, but you might as well read it as such.
Well, I mean, if MJ Rodriguez is playing the role, then she's going to bring that context to it.
Of course.